I am 70 years old, and yet I stood in a crowded room filled with my own blood relatives, my chest rising and falling as if I were back in the battlefield of my youth. They thought I was weak, senile, and too old to matter. They thought I had lost my mind. But as the lawyer cleared his throat to read aloud the so-called final will that my son had prepared behind my back, I knew every eye in the room was about to witness a betrayal so deep it would scorch my family name forever. And I knew something else this day would not end the way my son had planned. When you imagine betrayal, you picture strangers, business rivals, maybe even a spouse who lost their way. You don't imagine your own flesh and blood, the boy you once cradled in your arms, the boy you worked your whole life to raise turning against you. But here I was, listening to him smile smugly in the corner as the lawyer unfolded the papers. I could almost hear his unspoken thoughts. The old man doesn't know. He won't resist. He'll be gone soon, and everything will be mine. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had prepared for this moment months ago. I had seen the cracks long before anyone else. I had smelled the greed on my son like the bitter smoke of a fire long before the flames rose. And as I stood in that suffocating room, my cane firmly in my hand, my breath steady despite the storm in my chest, I made a silent vow today the truth will not only come out, but it will shatter their arrogance into dust. The lawyer's voice began to echo his words, sharp, deliberate. According to this last will and testament. He paused for effect, and every head in the room leaned forward. My son glanced at me with the faintest curl of a smile, his eyes flashing with triumph. He had been waiting for this. He thought he had already won. But I want you, the one listening to my confession now, to understand something very clearly. The story you are about to hear is not simply about a father and a son. It is about dignity, about betrayal that cuts through blood, and about the kind of justice only a man who has lived through decades of storms can deliver. Ask yourself this: what would you do if the person you trusted most tried to bury you alive while you were still breathing? Would you forgive? Would you surrender? Or would you sharpen your soul into a blade and strike back when they least expected? This is not a tale of patience. It is a tale of revenge carved carefully through months of silence. And the moment the lawyer opened his mouth, the noose that my son had tied around my neck was already slipping from me and tightening around his own. Everyone in the room was silent, but inside me 1,000 voices screamed. My late wife's face flashed before my eyes, her gentle smile reminding me of promises we made to keep our family together. I thought of my grandchildren too young to understand the greed of adults, too innocent to see the trap that had been set. I thought of the nights I had worked with bleeding hands, just to keep a roof over their heads. And now the child who had eaten my bread, who had slept under my roof, was about to erase me as if I had never existed. But here is where the story twists. I let him believe he had succeeded. I let him think the performance was his. I let him march into this room with the arrogance of a conqueror because I knew that the fall would be that much harder. He thought today would be his coronation. He had no idea it was his funeral of honor. So as the lawyer's words rolled out, as my relatives gasped at the idea that all of my life's work, all of the land, the businesses, the inheritance was to go entirely to my eldest son, cutting everyone else out, I did not speak. I watched. I measured every flinch, every stolen glance, every trembling hand. And when the final words echoed in the hall, when silence settled like ash after a fire, I raised my hand, slowly gripping my cane, as if it were the scepter of an emperor. I have something to say, I announced, my voice stronger than they had expected. Every head turned. My son's smile faltered just for a second, like a shadow passing over his face. He tried to cover it, but I saw it. and I knew the game had finally reached its end. You may think this is the climax already. No, this is just the opening wound. Because before the truth was revealed, before the fire of justice roared through that room, there was a backstory, a journey of trust, of cracks forming, of red flags ignored, that brought me here. And if you stay with me, I will show you not just how my son tried to steal my very soul, but how I turned the blade back onto him. Do you want to know how a man everyone called old and finished managed to outwit the very son who thought he was the future? Do you want to know what happened after that trembling silence in the room when my words sliced deeper than any knife? Then listen carefully, because everything started long before this cursed day, long before the lawyer's voice filled the air. It started with trust, and it ended with betrayal. Before I tell you how my son betrayed me, you must understand what he once meant to me, and what I once was to him. Because betrayal only cuts this deep when it grows out of love, when it comes from the very person you once would have given your life for. I am 70 years old now, but there was a time when my back was straight, my arms strong, and my name carried weight in this town. People called me a man of honor, someone who built his fortune with his hands, instead of stealing from others. My son grew up in the shadow of that reputation, and I thought he carried my blood with the same dignity. I was wrong. When he was a boy, I remember the nights he would run barefoot through the dusty yard, chasing fireflies with laughter so loud the neighbors could hear. His mother, God rest her soul, would lean on the porch rail, smiling with pride. We didn't have much back then, but we had each other. I would come home with calloused hands from long hours at the workshop, and my son would rush to show me drawings he made, ideas for machines he imagined. I thought he had inherited my determination, my hunger to build. I used to tell him, "One day all this will be yours, but you must earn it, son. You must respect what it cost me to get here." He nodded every time with eyes full of admiration. Or so I believed. Life tested us early. When my wife fell sick, it was me who spent nights by her bedside praying for a miracle, watching her body weaken day by day. My son was only 17 when she passed. I watched him cry at her grave, his shoulders shaking, and I held him as tightly as I could. In that moment I swore I would be both father and mother to him, that I would protect him from every storm. That promise burned in me for years. I worked harder than ever, expanding the workshop into a business, buying land, opening small shops, building a legacy stone by stone. Every brick was laid with the thought that my son would inherit not just wealth, but honor. The years went by, and he grew into a man. He studied, though not as hard as he could have. He made friends, some good, some dangerous. But I closed my eyes to his flaws, convincing myself he would learn in time. I remember the first time he asked me for money to start a project of his own. He came to me with a wide smile, speaking of opportunities of quick profits. I gave it to him without hesitation, thinking this was my chance to let him stand on his own. The money disappeared, the project failed, and he returned empty-handed. "It happens, Father," he said, shrugging as if it were nothing. I scolded him, but then forgave. After all, mistakes are part of youth. There were other signs, but I ignored them. His appetite for luxury grew faster than his appetite for work. He liked new clothes, shiny cars, dinners at places I had never been. I told myself times had changed, that young men were different now. But still I saw glimpses of the boy who once ran barefoot in the yard, and I clung to that memory. I told myself he still loved me, still respected me. Perhaps that was my greatest mistake, loving him too much to see the truth. I remember the day I handed him the keys to the business office. "One day you will take over," I told him. His eyes lit up, but not with responsibility, no. It was greed that flickered there, though I was too blind to see. My neighbors congratulated me, saying how proud I must be to have a son ready to inherit. I smiled, but deep down, something unsettled me. The boy who once wanted to build had become a man who only wanted to own. You see, betrayal never begins in a single moment. It seeps in like water through cracks, drop by drop, until the foundation you thought was solid begins to rot. And by the time you notice, it is too late. Looking back now, I can trace the pattern clearly. But in those years, I was still the father who wanted to believe, who wanted to give him every chance to prove himself. There were quiet mornings when we drank coffee together, talking about business plans. He pretended to listen, but his eyes wandered. There were dinners where he bragged about new friends with connections while ignoring the values his mother and I once taught him. Still, I told myself he would grow out of it. Still, I believed blood was stronger than temptation. What I did not know was that even then, while I was dreaming of passing on my legacy, he was already dreaming of a shortcut. I saw him whispering with lawyers I didn't know. I saw letters pile up in his drawer that he never let me read. I felt the distance growing between us, but I told myself it was the natural way of fathers and sons. How foolish I was. Let me take you back even further to the beginning of my life's work. Because if you don't understand what I built, you won't understand the magnitude of what he tried to steal. I was not born into wealth. I was born in a house where rain leaked through the roof and hunger was a constant visitor. My father died when I was young, leaving me with only my mother and 2 sisters. I worked at the age of 12 carrying bricks at construction sites. By 16, I had scars on my hands that never healed. I saved every coin, every scrap of bread, until I could rent a small space to start repairing tools and furniture. That small workshop grew slowly, painfully, into something bigger. By 30, I had enough to buy land. By 40, I had built 3 stores. By 50, I was known as a man who came from nothing and created something enduring. All of it, every grain of sweat, every sleepless night was meant for my family, for him, for the boy I once carried on my shoulders. And that is why his betrayal later would cut so deeply deeper than if a stranger had stolen everything. Because he was supposed to be my blood, my legacy, my pride. I still remember the last time his mother smiled at me before she passed. She took my hand and whispered, "Take care of him. Make sure he grows into a good man." I nodded with tears in my eyes, promising her I would never fail him. But how do you protect a man from himself? How do you shield a heart that chooses greed over love? Back then, when trust was whole, I believed my family was unbreakable. I believed no matter what storms came, we would stand together. But standing here today, confessing this story, I know now that trust is a fragile thing. It can be built over decades and destroyed in a single moment. And that moment, the moment when all illusions collapsed, was drawing closer with every passing day. The will reading was not the first red flag. The first cracks appeared long before. They were subtle like whispers in a crowded room, like shadows that vanish when you turn your head. But they were there. And if you stay with me, I will show you how those red flags grew louder and darker until I could no longer ignore them. The downfall of trust never comes crashing down in a single night. It begins with small fractures, whispers that you almost dismiss, shadows that you convince yourself are tricks of the light. Looking back, I can see the warning signs as clearly as the wrinkles on my hands. At the time, I buried them deep, telling myself that a father should not judge too harshly, that a son deserves forgiveness. But each red flag was a stone added to the avalanche that would eventually bury us all. The first red flag came on a cold morning when I found a letter on my desk. It was addressed to me, but the seal had already been broken. Inside was a notice from the bank reminding me of a loan I had never taken. My heart skipped, and I turned to my son. He was in the kitchen stirring sugar into his coffee with calm hands. "Did you open my mail?" I asked. He didn't even flinch. "It was delivered by mistake, Father. Nothing important." But the name on the loan was mine. The signature was mine. Only I had never held the pen that signed it. He laughed at my suspicion, brushing it away like dust on the table. "You're getting old. You probably forgot." Forgot. That word clung to me like poison. He wanted me to doubt myself. And for a moment I almost did. Another red flag came when neighbors whispered about seeing him in places he should never have been: gambling halls, expensive restaurants, private meetings with men whose names carried weight in shadows rather than sunlight. When I asked him, he smiled as though I were a paranoid old man. "I'm networking," he said. "That's how business is done now." I wanted to believe him. I told myself times had changed, that maybe I was too old-fashioned. But deep inside, a seed of unease began to sprout. Then there was the night he came home with the smell of alcohol so strong it filled the entire house. He dropped his coat on the floor, stumbled into a chair, and slurred his words. "Father, one day you won't have to worry. I'll take care of everything. I'll make sure you rest." The way he said it chilled me, not like a promise, but like a plan already in motion. Red flags multiplied. At the workshop, I discovered that funds were missing. Small amounts at first, the kind most people would overlook, but I knew every cent that came in and out. When I asked him, he put on a mask of innocence. "Business expenses, Father. You wouldn't understand." His tone was sharp, impatient, the tone of a man who no longer respected the one who raised him. That tone stung worse than the missing money. One evening, I overheard a phone call he thought I was too far away to hear. He whispered into the receiver, his voice low and urgent. "Yes, it's almost done. He won't notice. He trusts me." I froze in the hallway, my hand gripping the wall to steady myself. My own son was speaking of me like prey, like a fool ready to be slaughtered. When he hung up, he walked past me with a smile, as if nothing had happened. I forced a smile back, but inside something cracked. There were smaller details, too. He stopped calling me father and began calling me old man. At first he laughed, saying it was a joke, but each time the word cut deeper, as though he were slowly stripping away my identity, reducing me to weakness. He stopped asking for advice, stopped listening when I spoke. At dinners, he would glance at his phone, smirking at messages he refused to explain. The distance between us grew not just in words, but in silence. I tried to confront him once, sitting across from him at the table where his mother once served meals with love. I asked him directly, "Are you hiding something from me? Are you stealing from me?" He leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and smiled. "You worry too much, Father. Maybe you should let go. Maybe it's time you retired." Retired. The words sounded like exile. I did not retire. I did not let go. Instead, I began to watch more closely. I saw how he handled papers when he thought I wasn't looking, how he locked drawers that had never been locked in this house before. I saw how he avoided my gaze whenever the subject of inheritance came up. Then came the moment that should have torn the blindfold from my eyes completely. I walked into the study one night and found him with the lawyer. They were hunched over papers, whispering. When they saw me, they scrambled like guilty children caught with stolen candy. My son spoke first. "Father, this is nothing. Just updating some documents for the business." The lawyer nodded too quickly, avoiding my eyes. My son placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, but it felt like the grip of a thief. I should have demanded answers that night. Instead, I allowed myself to be fooled again. Why? Because love is blind. Because fathers cling to hope long after hope is dead. But the last red flag, the one that burned away the fog of denial, came on a Sunday morning. I was sitting in the garden enjoying the quiet when I overheard him on the phone again. This time he was careless. "Once the old man's gone, everything is mine. The shops, the land, the accounts, it'll all be under my name." My blood ran cold. I gripped the armrest of my chair until my knuckles turned white. It was no longer suspicion. It was no longer whispers. It was a confession from his own mouth. That was the moment I realized the son I once cradled, the boy I once carried on my shoulders, had died long ago. In his place stood a man consumed by greed, blinded by ambition, ready to erase me from existence while I was still breathing. I didn't confront him then. No, I stayed silent. Because I knew silence was my weapon now. I would let him dig his own grave, one lie at a time, one forged signature at a time. And when the day came, I would bury him in the truth he thought I was too old to wield. Those were the red flags, each one sharper than the last, each one cutting into my soul until there was nothing left but resolve. Betrayal was no longer a possibility, it was a certainty. And if you stay with me, I will tell you how the first twist came to light, the moment when his secret scheme revealed itself, halfway through, not at the end. Because stories like this do not wait politely for climaxes. They rip through the middle, leaving you gasping. You may think the red flags were already enough to break me, that any man with a sane mind would have confronted his son, exposed the lies, and stopped the bleeding before it consumed everything. But sometimes destiny has a cruel way of forcing the truth into the light at a time you least expect it. And that day came not at the grand will reading, but much earlier in the quiet of my own study, when I stumbled upon the first undeniable proof. It was late evening. The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. My son had gone out, as usual, dressed too sharply for business that never seemed to bring profit home. I was restless, my bones aching with the kind of unease that only grows heavier when you try to ignore it. I wandered into the study, my refuge for decades, the room where every contract, every receipt, every memory of my life's work was kept safe. But that night, the air felt different. Thick, almost as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. On the desk lay a folder I had never seen before. The paper edges were too crisp, the ink too fresh. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, but at 70 years old, I had learned that sometimes curiosity is survival. I opened the folder, and there it was, a draft of a will typed neatly with my name at the top. My heart pounded in my chest as my eyes scanned the lines. It was written as if I had dictated it myself, leaving every property, every business, every last coin to my eldest son, stripping his siblings and grandchildren of any claim. Stripping even me of my own dignity, because the signature at the bottom was mine. Or at least it was meant to be, but I knew my own hand. I had signed thousands of contracts, written countless checks, and I knew that the signature on that page was a forgery. A good forgery, yes, almost perfect, but not mine. My knees nearly gave way as I stared at it. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was evidence. This was betrayal carved in ink. I sat down heavily in the chair, the document trembling in my hands. My first instinct was rage, a fire so strong it threatened to consume me. I imagined storming into the street, finding him, grabbing him by the collar, and demanding answers. But then another instinct took over, one born from years of struggle, one sharper than fury strategy. If he had gone this far, if he had dared to forge my name on such a sacred document, then confronting him now would only drive him deeper into darkness. No, I thought. Let him play his game. Let him think he has already won. And so I placed the folder back exactly where I found it. I left the study, my face calm, my body steady, as if nothing had happened. But inside me, a new seed had been planted, not of doubt this time, but of revenge. The twist did not end there. A few nights later, I overheard him talking to the lawyer again, their voices low but sharp, slicing through the silence of the house. I stood in the hallway, hidden by shadows, listening. "We'll present it at the reading," the lawyer whispered. "No one will question it. He's too old to resist." My son chuckled, the sound like broken glass in my ears. "By then he'll be nothing but a memory. and I'll be the man of the house. Do you know what it feels like to hear your own child speak of you as if you're already dead? It is worse than death itself." I gripped the wall, my heart hammering, but I forced myself not to reveal my presence. They thought I was too frail, too senile, too broken to fight back. That was their mistake. The next morning I went into town and paid a visit to an old friend, an attorney I had trusted for decades, a man who had known me since the days when I could barely afford shoes. I handed him the draft. I had found my voice steady. "They're planning something," I said. "I need the law on my side before they strike." He studied the paper, his brow furrowed. "This is serious. If they succeed, you'll lose everything." I nodded. That's why they cannot succeed. Together we drafted a new will this time, with every detail triple-checked, notarized, sealed in a vault where no one could touch it. And while we were at it, I asked him for one more thing to help me prepare a recording evidence of my own words, so that when the day came, the truth would roar louder than any forgery. That was the early twist. The moment I shifted from being prey to being hunter, they thought they were clever, but I had already laid the first trap. Still, I kept silent. I returned home that evening, ate dinner with my son, as if nothing had happened. He laughed, told stories of friends and business, and I nodded, smiled, even though inside I wanted to spit. He looked at me and saw an old man too weary to notice. He had no idea that I had already seen behind his mask. The days that followed were a theater of lies. He moved around the house with confidence, planning meetings, hiding documents, whispering on the phone. He thought he was building a kingdom in secret. But I watched. I listened. And I prepared. Every nod I gave him, every smile I forced was another brick in the wall that would eventually close around him. Do you understand now why the will reading was so powerful? Because by the time that day arrived, I had already seen the betrayal in full color. I had already armed myself with the truth. The only thing left was to wait for him to tighten his own noose. But the twist cut me in another way, too. You see, it wasn't just my son. The lawyer, someone who had once shared drinks with me, someone I had invited into my home, was in on it as well. That realization broke something deeper inside me. Betrayal from a son is unbearable, but betrayal from someone who swore an oath to uphold the law that poisoned my faith in everything. I began to question myself. Was I really too old? Was I clinging to the past while the world moved on without me? That's what they wanted me to believe, that I was irrelevant, powerless, obsolete. But each night as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard my wife's voice in my memory whispering, "Stand tall. Protect what you built." And I knew I could not allow them to erase me so easily. So I played the game. I nodded when he spoke of the future. I smiled when he bragged about what he would do when the time came. I even allowed him to believe I trusted him completely, because that trust would be the rope that hung him. The early twist was not just the discovery of the forged will. It was the realization that I was not helpless. That even in old age, even when the world calls you finished, you can still outwit those who underestimate you. It was the moment I stopped being the victim and started becoming the executioner of their arrogance, and yet the worst was still to come. Because once you uncover a secret, once you peel back the first layer of betrayal, you realize there are darker layers beneath. My son's hunger was greater than I had imagined. His deceit was bolder than I had feared. And soon the storm would escalate beyond whispers and papers into open conflict. When you uncover a betrayal, you imagine the hardest part is behind you, that the sting of discovery is the sharpest pain you will feel. But that is a lie. The hardest part is pretending you don't know, living each day, as though the knife isn't lodged in your back, as though the blade isn't twisting deeper with every word, every smile, every hollow promise. That is where I found myself. After the forged will, after the whispered conspiracies, after the lawyer's treachery, I was forced to live in the theater of lies my son built, acting my part so perfectly that he never once suspected I was onto him. And with every act I performed, the storm around me grew heavier, darker, closer. The escalation began slowly. It was subtle at first the way neighbors started to glance at me differently, whispers exchanged when I walked down the street. My son had been speaking to people planting seeds, shaping the story long before the reading of the will. "Father's not well," I overheard him say one afternoon to a family friend. "He forgets things. He confuses dates. I don't know how much longer he can handle the business. Lies, all lies. I remembered everything sharper than a blade. But perception is its own kind of truth, and he was crafting a narrative that I was slipping, that I was no longer fit to stand at the helm of the empire I had built with my bare hands. At the bakery down the road, an old friend leaned in and whispered, "I heard you're stepping down soon, leaving everything to your eldest." Is it true? His words cut me like glass. Step down, I had made no such announcement. But the rumor was spreading fast, and I could see the smug satisfaction in my son's eyes when he returned home at night, his pockets jingling, his voice dripping with false concern. "Father, maybe you should rest more," he said one evening as we sat in the living room. "You've done enough. You deserve peace. Let me handle things now." His hand patted mine like I was a frail patient on his deathbed. But I saw it, the hunger in his gaze, the calculation behind his words. He didn't want my peace. He wanted my throne. I nodded, forced a weak smile. "Perhaps you're right," I murmured. Inside my chest was burning. He thought he was closer than ever to victory. He thought the walls were closing around me, when in reality I was the one closing them around him. But the weight of the performance was crushing. I had to watch as he rifled through my study when he thought I was asleep. I had to hear the lawyer's voice on the phone assuring him everything would go as planned. I had to endure the humiliation of neighbors treating me like a relic, a man already fading into irrelevance. Do you know what it's like to be erased while you're still alive? To watch your own name reduced to a whisper while your heart still beats strong? It is a torment I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. And yet I endured it because patience is the weapon of the old. Young men think victory comes from speed, from striking first. But we the old, we know that victory belongs to the one who endures, who waits until the prey has no escape left. Still, the escalation did not remain confined to whispers and rumors. Soon, the lies bled into my family. My younger children came to visit one Sunday. Their eyes were full of confusion, their voices hesitant. "Father," one of them began, "is it true you've decided to leave everything to him?" My heart broke as I saw doubt flicker in their faces, doubt planted by their own brother. I shook my head slowly. "Do you think I would forget you? Do you think I would betray your mother's memory by choosing one above all?" Their eyes softened, but the seed of suspicion had already been planted. And that was his strategy all along: divide the family, make himself the savior, the chosen heir, while painting me as a senile old man incapable of fairness. The walls of my home became suffocating. Every corner carried the echo of his voice, every shadow the weight of his betrayal. At night, I lay in bed listening to the creak of the floorboards as he prowled through the house, searching for documents, for proof, for control. I would close my eyes and imagine grabbing him by the throat, screaming into his face the truth I already knew. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet, because the storm was still gathering, and storms must reach their peak before they break. The tension reached its boiling point the night I caught him in my office with the lawyer, their heads bent close together over papers spread across my desk. They didn't hear me approach. They were too consumed with their scheming. "After the reading, it's done," the lawyer whispered. "He won't be able to contest it. The family will side with you and the court won't question a thing." My son laughed quietly, the sound like venom in my ears. Good. He won't even know what hit him. In that moment, I almost revealed myself. I almost stormed in, grabbed the forged papers, and threw them in their faces. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped back into the shadows, my fists trembling at my sides. Because I knew that their arrogance would be their undoing. They believed they were untouchable. They believed the world was already theirs. And that blindness was the weapon I needed. The next morning, my son greeted me with his usual false concern, his smile as bright as ever. Father, are you feeling well? You've been quiet lately. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw not the boy I had raised, not the child who once clung to my hand, but a stranger, a vulture, a man who would rather see his father buried than share a crumb of the empire he lusted after. My chest ached with sorrow, but I swallowed it down. Instead, I smiled faintly and said, I'm fine. Just tired. He nodded, satisfied, blind to the fury smoldering behind my eyes. The escalation wasn't just external. It was inside me too. Each day my anger grew pressing against my ribs like a storm, desperate to be unleashed. But I held it. I contained it. Because I knew the climax was coming, and when it did, it would not be a whisper in a hallway. It would be an explosion that shattered every mask, every lie, every fragile illusion he had built. By the time the date of the will reading was announced, the entire town seemed to know before I did. People came to me with polite smiles, their eyes gleaming with curiosity. We'll be there, they said. We wouldn't miss it. It was clear now this wasn't just a family matter anymore. It was a spectacle, a public theater. And my son had invited the audience himself, certain that the show would end with him crowned king. But he had no idea that I was the one writing the script. That night, I sat alone in my study, the real will tucked safely away, the recording ready, my plan complete. The storm was almost here. I could feel it pressing against the windows, rattling the doors, echoing in my chest. The escalation had reached its peak. All that remained was the breaking of the sky, the flash of lightning, the roar of thunder that would expose everything. And I, the frail old man they thought finished, would be the one holding the match. The day of the will reading arrived with a heaviness in the air that no sun could cut through. The town hall was packed tighter than a church on Easter Sunday. Every seat filled, every corner crowded neighbors and extended family buzzing with anticipation. They weren't here to honor me. They were here to witness the coronation of my eldest son, the man who had whispered to everyone that I was finished, that my empire was his for the taking. He had made it a spectacle, invited not just family but friends, colleagues, even strangers, because in his arrogance, he wanted witnesses to his triumph. I walked in slowly, cane in hand, every step measured, deliberate. Let them see the frailty. Let them believe the story he had spun, that I was an old man ready to crumble at the weight of my own years. My son strutted beside the lawyer like a king. In waiting, his suit freshly pressed, his smile gleaming with the confidence of a man who thought the crown already rested on his head. "Father," he said loudly enough for all to hear, "thank you for coming. Don't worry, I'll take good care of everything." His hand clapped my shoulder, a gesture meant to look affectionate but heavy with condescension. The crowd chuckled softly, approvingly. They were already on his side. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, and began to read. The first words made my blood run cold, not from shock, but from fury, because I had heard them before. They were the words of the forged will. I being of sound mind. He continued, his voice steady, as he recited the lines that cut out every other child, every grandchild, every loyal member of my family, leaving everything, every house, every business, every last cent to the eldest son. Gasps filled the room. My younger children looked at me with wide eyes, betrayed and broken. Whispers spread like wildfire. My son stood taller, soaking in the attention, his chest puffed with pride. He glanced at me, daring me to resist, confident I would remain silent, that I would bow my head and accept my own erasure. For a moment I let the silence stretch. I let them all believe it was over, that the old man had surrendered. Then I raised my hand. My voice, though worn by age, cut through the room like a blade. "Stop," the lawyer faltered, blinking at me. My son frowned, his jaw tightening. "Father," he said through clenched teeth, "you don't need to strain yourself. Just let it finish." But I didn't let it finish. Slowly, I rose from my chair, my cane steadying me, my back straighter than it had been in years. "You think you can bury me before I am dead?" I said, my words echoing across the hall. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on me. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. My son's face drained of color as he recognized it. "This," I said, holding it high, "is my will, the real will. Not that forgery you and your snake of a lawyer cooked up." Gasps again, louder this time, sharper. The lawyer's face turned ashen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. My son stammered, You don't know what you're saying." But I wasn't finished. I motioned to the back of the hall, where my trusted attorney, the one I had gone to in secret, stepped forward with a briefcase. He opened it and revealed the notarized documents, stamped, signed, sealed. "Witnessed and certified," my attorney announced. Beyond dispute, the room erupted into chaos. My younger children cried out in relief, rushing to my side. Neighbors whispered furiously, some shaking their heads, others glaring at my son with disgust. He stumbled backward, his composure cracking. "This is a trick," he shouted. "He's senile. He doesn't know what he's doing." And that was when I unleashed the final blow. I reached into my pocket once more and drew out a small recorder. My hand trembled, but my voice was steady. I pressed play. The room filled with the sound of his voice, clear and undeniable. "By then he'll be nothing but a memory, and I'll be the man of the house." The lawyer's voice followed, hissing like a snake. "No one will question it. He's too old to resist." The hall froze. Every eye turned to my son. His face twisted in horror as his own words betrayed him. "That's not real," he screamed. "He's framing me," but the damage was done. The recording echoed through the hall like a verdict from heaven itself. I looked him in the eyes, the boy I had once cradled in my arms, the child I had taught to walk, to speak, to dream. My voice broke, but I did not falter. "You were my son, my blood, my legacy. And you chose greed over family, betrayal over loyalty. Today the world sees you for what you are." He lunged forward, his face contorted with rage, but two men from the crowd grabbed him, pulling him back. My younger children stood between us, their faces fierce, their eyes blazing with fury at the brother who had tried to rob them all. The lawyer tried to slip away, but the crowd blocked him, their jeers rising like thunder. "Thief!" someone shouted. "Snake!" another cried. The climax had arrived, and it was no longer just my battle. It was justice itself roaring to life in the voices of those who had once doubted me. My son stood exposed, humiliated, powerless. And I, the old man he thought finished, stood taller than ever. Silence fell once more as I held the real will high. "This is my word," I said firmly. "This is my choice. My legacy will not be stolen. My family will not be divided. And my dignity will not be erased." The lawyer collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. My son, red-faced and trembling, screamed curses at me, but his words fell flat against the walls that now closed in on him. No one listened. No one cared. His empire of lies had crumbled, and all that remained was the rubble of his own arrogance. The hall erupted again, this time in applause, cheers, and tears. My children embraced me, their voices choked with gratitude. Neighbors came forward, their faces full of shame for ever doubting me. But I didn't bask in their approval. My heart was heavy broken by the reality of what my own son had become. Victory is never sweet when it comes at the cost of blood. Still, the truth had been revealed. The confrontation had torn the mask away, exposing every lie, every betrayal, every whisper that had poisoned my name. And in that moment, standing tall before the crowd, I knew the storm had broken. The lightning had struck. The thunder had rolled. I was not erased. I was not finished. I was still here. The will reading ended not with celebration, but with silence, the kind of silence that follows a storm when the air is still thick with smoke and broken branches. My eldest son, once so certain of his victory, now sat in the corner with his head bowed, his face pale, his hands trembling as though he were the one growing old. The lawyer beside him looked no stronger, his career ruined, his reputation in tatters, his eyes darting nervously at every whisper around the room. They were men exposed, their armor stripped away, their arrogance crushed beneath the weight of their own greed. I stood there, not triumphant, not smiling, but steady. My cane pressed against the wooden floor, my heart still pounding with the echoes of confrontation. I had won. The truth had prevailed. My legacy, my dignity, my family's future, it was safe, at least for now. But victory tastes different when it comes at the cost of your own blood. My younger children came to me, tears streaking their faces. They embraced me one by one, whispering apologies for ever doubting me for believing the whispers their brother had spread. I held them tightly, my arms trembling, not from age but from the weight of relief. It's over, I told them softly, though. Deep inside, I knew it would never truly be over. Betrayal doesn't vanish with the stroke of a pen. It lingers, it scars. Neighbors approached me too, offering words of respect, of shame, of admiration. Some lowered their eyes, embarrassed that they had believed the lies. Others grasped my hand firmly, their voices strong with support. But their validation meant little. I had not fought for their applause. I had fought for myself, for my wife's memory, for the years I had poured into building something from nothing. As the hall emptied, my eldest son remained seated, his chest heaving, his eyes refusing to meet mine. For a brief moment, I wanted to reach out to ask him why the boy I had raised with love and care had chosen greed over loyalty, why my own blood had sought to erase me. But I knew the answer before the question could leave my lips. Some men are blinded by hunger so deep it consumes them. Some men choose betrayal over love because they believe power will outlast family. I turned away from him, my steps heavy, my heart heavier. That was the last time I looked at him, not as a son, but as a stranger. The days that followed were not easy. The town still buzzed with talk of the confrontation, the recording, the downfall of the would-be heir. The lawyer resigned in disgrace, his name forever stained. My son withdrew from the world, unable to face the stares, the whispers, the shame. My younger children visited me often, protective, now determined to show me the love they feared they had lost. And I, though grateful, still carried the wound of betrayal like a shadow that never leaves. At night, I would sit alone in my study, the documents safe, once more, the true will locked away where no hand could touch it. I would stare at the photo of my wife, her smile frozen in time, her eyes alive with the fire that had carried me through the hardest years. I did it, I would whisper to her. I protected what we built. I kept our name, our dignity. But in the quiet, I also asked her the question that haunted me. Where did I go wrong with him? I may never know the answer. Perhaps I gave too much. Perhaps I trusted too easily. Perhaps I believed love alone could shield us from greed. All I know is this betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from within, and yet it is in those moments of deepest pain that a man must rise, must stand, must fight not for revenge alone, but for dignity, because dignity is all we truly own in the end. Money fades, property crumbles, even family can turn against you. But dignity, your name, your truth, your honor, that is the legacy no thief can steal, no liar can forge, no betrayer can erase. I tell you my story not because it is easy to relive, but because I know there are others out there sitting in silence, swallowing betrayal, afraid to stand tall. Perhaps you are one of them. Perhaps you've been made to feel powerless, too old, too weak, too forgotten. I am here to tell you you are not. Age does not erase wisdom. Frailty does not erase strength. Silence does not erase truth. If I, a 70-year-old man written off by his own blood, could stand before a room full of doubters and expose the lies, then so can you. So now I ask you, if you were in my place, if your own blood turned against you, if your dignity was on the line, would you stay silent to keep the peace, or would you rise as I did to reclaim your name? Tell me. I want to know. Because your answer may give courage to someone who needs it tonight. And remember this, no matter how dark the betrayal, no matter how sharp the knife in your back, dignity is worth the fight. Always.